Welcome to Marney Reid Presents Connect to Develop, where we provide insight from healthcare leaders on the hottest topics and trends.
Hello, listeners. This is our third in the four-part series with two industry-leading experts to discuss the state of the union of spine and orthopedic practices, housekeeping items that private practices and departments should consistently attend to, the anatomy of a private equity partnership if your group or department looks at exploring that option, and various key items to incorporate or watch out for before and after signing a letter of intent. In today's episode, we'll discuss key financial terms, both initial and ongoing during the deal process, review key protections to put into place to retain physician clinical autonomy, schedules, workload, call coverage, etc., and talk about PE versus family offices versus public companies versus hospitals. That's a lot of verses that we're going to unpack.
I'd like to introduce Dana Jacoby, CEO and founder of Becker Medical Group, who brings insight and experience from over 2 decades working in healthcare. She spent the last 10 plus years assisting physician groups and departments with market strategy, including advising them during private equity deal assessments and transactions. Hello, Dana.
Hi, Marnie. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you.
And Gary Herschman Esq, member of the law firm Epstein, Becker, Green. Gary brings over 30 years of experience and hundreds of transactions with physician practices to the discussion. He works with practices and hospitals on consolidations and new partnerships or affiliations. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Marnie. Thanks again for having me be part of this excellent podcast series.
Dana, can you walk us through the different phases of how this whole thing would work? How does the process even start?
Yeah, usually, Marnie, hopefully there's a handful of partners or an executive committee that decides they want to research this process. That's hopefully how it starts. Once in a while, somebody will get an inbound from a potential investor, and all of a sudden they have a prenup and they haven't even thought about if they want to ever get married, and we're off to the races. But before, if it's a thoughtful process, there should be a group of doctors or, a handful of leaders that basically say, you know what, we're not sure if now is the time, but we'd like to do a market assessment and evaluation analysis of our business. And this, by the way, this is just a good best practice in general. Like, you don't have to be going to get married to look at, are your ducks in a row? Do you have everything ready to go? And what is the value of your business? Sometimes just that process can bring forth a ton of education for the partners of where the gaps are, where some of the things are they need to work on. So first piece is market analysis. Look at the buyer universe or investor universe, look at your valuation, which we've covered on a prior podcast. The second piece would really be, okay, you see the number or you see the opportunity, you see the universe of buyers or investors, and you say, you know what? Is that real? Is there a there? What if we did reach out to a handful of these folks? What materials do we need? Do we need a pitch deck that basically tells the story of our business? Do we need to have our financials in a data room so that we're not just running around if somebody is interested? So you'd get ready to look at this, suitor universe and really draft your marketing materials, get your operations in place, make sure your group is aligned and ready to take on this phase 2 step. But this would be market exploration, preparation, and launch. So, that may be where you want to really double down. If you've got a banker or a broker or a consultant, you definitely want at this point to have somebody like Gary. You want to have a merger and acquisition deal flow attorney like an Epstein, Becker, Green that specializes in this space. So that's where you're going to want to get kind of all your advisors in place, suitor universe in place, et cetera. And again, there's a go and no-go decision making at that, Marnie. You may say, thank you very much. We looked at the market. We looked at the buyer universe or the investors. We're going to hold the line and stay independent for another 24 months, whatever. Phase 3 is really, okay, we think there is a there. You may have had a suitor or 2 or 3 throw a letter of intent or an indication of interest at your practice. That means the valuation that you looked at is holding. You basically have alignment of the partners. You've got all your materials ready to go, and you now have a group of people ready that you want to sit down and meet with. And this is where it gets real. I mean, this is where you're going to start looking at things like, negotiation as it relates to the letter of intent or the indication of interest. This is where you're going to have in-person suitor discussions. You're going to have people actually come on site. And then you're going to look at basically selecting out for who those people might be that you want. If you've had a buyer universe that you've looked at, and you're going to basically want to go down to one or two suitors that you might want to come into play with. And then you're really going to tighten the screws on the due diligence. They're going to be asking for more than just a prenup. You're going to be asking for more than just a prenup. Hopefully in phase 2, if you did it right, you had a lot of the terms in that prenup discussed and sophisticated so that you're not, looking at something where in phase 3, you're trying to go back to phase 2. And then phase 4, you hopefully have found one person or a suitor or investor that you want to really double down on, and the due diligence is checked out, and now you're ready to really consummate the marriage. And that's where, someone like Gary and Gary's team would come in and really finalize the merger and acquisition agreements, really discuss things in the final documents that you're going to basically close the deal. So I went through that, fairly high level. There's a ton underneath each one of the phases. But, the good thing for your listeners to hear, Marney, is that there is a go or no-go decision at every single phase. So it's not like the minute they look at the market or look at their valuation, they're at the altar, finalizing the marriage. There's a lot between here and there. In phase 1 and part of phase 2, honestly, you could do even pregame without knowing you want to get married at all. That may be just a good analysis of the market conditions and where you sit as a group.
Gary, during any of these 4 phases, Dana alludes to the go, no go that you can do at every phase. As an attorney advising on these, where are the most critical go, no goes, if there are any most critical?
So I think the most critical no-go is after the internal market assessment, because, without ever going out to the market and seeing what offers are out there, getting a realistic view from, a strategic consultant or investment banker as to what the market will value approximately your practice at. And usually these are very conservative. Everybody, that gives these goes low so that, if the evaluations come in higher, it just looks, it's even better. But they usually look at a low case scenario. And if the doctors wouldn't be happy with that, that's an important go, no go. That's probably the first most important no go, no go, because, there's a lot of time and effort that goes in, and expense as you get deeper into the transaction process. There's really very minimal expense and no legal expense, which is nice in the first stage. It's just that assessment. And, I always say that, doctors understand the concept of informed consent, right? They have to tell their patients about the pros and cons and risks of a procedure before they make an informed decision to say, okay, I'm going ahead with it. This is kind of like this first step, not doing this first step and just having groups, and I've seen this, that just say, we're not interested in private equity, and they don't even do this first step. To me, they're saying, I don't want to do the procedure, and covering their ears and not wanting to listen to the pros and cons of the procedure. I think that every group, should at least do this first internal step that's very inexpensive to understand what their value would be and how a transaction would likely look, and then decide in a fully informed way, do you want to go the next step or not? So I think that's pretty important from a fiduciary and, being educated perspective. And I think the next most important, the second most important go, no go decision is at the letter of intent stage. I know we're going to talk more about letters of intent in the next podcast, but the letter of intent, you sign that letter of intent. You can't talk to anybody else. You're exclusive to this one group, and they do very extensive, like I said, before, inside out due diligence. Talked about this in the other session, which gets it's very time consuming on the staff of the facility, the management folks, office manager, and whatnot, it gets very expensive. And, you also start to have agreements that lawyers have to look at. Listen, the lawyer absolutely positively should review the letter of intent and advise you on it. Do not sign a letter of intent without an experienced lawyer looking at it and advising you about it. But that's really the first legal involvement. The legal involvement after that and the other expenses and time, it starts to, after the letter of intent, it gets very heavy with the diligence and with negotiating agreements with lawyers. So that's also, I would say, an equally or second most important go, no go decision.
To the point that you made about fiduciary duty to the group and, really wanting to look at, your value, the way I look at it is oftentimes, and it breaks my heart, I see practices start coming to the table with these groups coming from a place of, quite frankly, weakness, right? It's a defensive move. Either a health system has started buying up, the referral sources in the area, or their contracts are getting lower, or their ASC isn't doing as well. To the point that you made about at least looking at what your value is and knowing what the options are, you're coming from a place of strength when you go into these negotiations where you can be holding people to certain terms that you want instead of them holding you over a barrel, so to speak.
Absolutely. That's a great point. You want to explore from a point of strength. Everyone knows, reimbursements going down and the environment's getting more competitive just about in every market. You don't want to wait until you start to have more significant financial impact. Maybe you're feeling it a little bit, or things are staying level or going down a little. That's when you want to be looking, not when things have gone down substantially. And Dana, I know you've had situations like that.
Yeah, quite a bit. You're right, Marney. And the more groups can really be proactive, and hospital. I mean, it's not just physician groups. I think the more people can be very proactive in looking at things pre-game, it's a contingency plan, right? It's saving for a rainy day. It's all the things that you learned at 5 years old, but it just gets really hard when you're in the business, not to be working on the business. And all of these things should be things you should be thinking about pre-deal or pre-discussion.
So as we're looking at the anatomy of the deal, all the checkups that groups need to be having, all of, the health assessments, any other things that you really want to leave the listeners with as critical components that we maybe haven't covered?
I want to talk about reverse diligence as an important part of the process, Marney, which we didn't talk about yet, which is the doctors, looking at these executives and other physicians across the table from the platform. And, are they giving me good answers? Do I trust them? Are these people I want to partner with? So that kind of reverse diligence and getting a good, do we feel like our cultures fit? Does this look like a good partner for us? They're trying to assess whether the group is a good partner for the platform, but you need to be assessing that too. And I always recommend that doctors outside of that meeting try to reach out to other doctors in groups that have partnered, that are part of that platform. Not the top executives, presidents, but the doctors who were junior doctors or mid-level partners. Not the names they give you, but poke around and see who's trained with who and reach out to folks and just get an honest assessment of, do they really like it? Have they lived up to their obligations? So I think that concept of the reverse diligence is very important.
I love that. Great tips on the anatomy of the deal and how to prepare for it. Thank you both.
Thanks, Marney. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Marty.
For anyone listening who'd like to request a complimentary town hall either in person or via webinar with Dana and Gary to unpack these topics or even discuss your practice or department situation, please email info@vectormedicalgroup.com to schedule a time. You can also register for their November 8th, 12:30 p.m. sponsored session at the upcoming 2024 Annual AAHKS Meeting titled Private Equity and Orthopedic Groups, where they'll discuss the latest updates, pros and cons, second bites, and life after closing. Check out the show notes for more information about this upcoming session and for that email address if you didn't catch it the first time. Thanks for listening to Connect to Develop. You can find more interviews and Marney's Minutes on my YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.